Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're looking at something pretty specific, but really significant that happened back in the summer of 2021.
Right, this encounter in the South China Sea.
Exactly. Between the British aircraft carrier, HMS Queen Elizabeth, and a very modern Chinese destroyer, the Type 52D.
Yeah, and for anyone tracking global strategy, especially maybe from a U.S. perspective, this was a moment worth unpacking.
Definitely. Because, the South China Sea, it's not just water, is it?
Oh, not at all. It's huge for global trade. Trillions, literally trillions in goods pass through.
Plus all the resources underneath, oil, gas, and it's just crowded with competing claims.
And that's the real tension point. You've got multiple countries with claims, but China's 9-dash line, well, that covers almost everything.
Right, claims about 90% of it. And even though there was that international ruling back in 2016 saying it didn't hold up under international law,
China basically ignored it. They act as if it's theirs.
So when the HMS Queen Elizabeth, the UK's brand new carrier, sailed through as part of this big deployment, CSG-21, that wasn't just a casual visit.
No way. That deployment itself was a statement. It was the UK getting back into the carrier game after, a decade?
Yeah, a big signal about wanting to project power globally again.
And choosing the South China Sea for that transit, that was deliberately putting a major piece of Western naval power right in China's backyard, basically.
Right where Beijing considers its core interests to lie. And the response wasn't slow, was it?
Nope. Almost immediately, this Chinese destroyer, a Type 52D, shows up and starts shadowing the British fleet.
And we should probably stress for maybe listeners here in the U.S. thinking about naval hardware, the Type 52D isn't some old rust bucket.
Oh, absolutely not. This is one of the plans, the People's Liberation Army Navy's top-tier ships. Advanced radar, missiles, electronic warfare. It's a peer, or near-peer competitor.
So this kind of shadowing, is it totally unusual there?
Well, yes and no. Ships monitoring each other, especially foreign warships, happens quite a bit in the South China Sea. It's a known way of signaling.
But a whole carrier strike group, led by a ship like the Queen Elizabeth.
That definitely upped the ante. It wasn't just a frigate passing through, it was a symbol of renewed British and, by extension, Western naval power directly challenging China's narrative of dominance in the area, something Washington undoubtedly watched very closely.
Okay, so let's dig into the shadowing itself. Why do it? From China's point of view, what's the gain in sending one of your best destroyers to tail the Brits?
Well, several things likely going on there. First, intelligence gathering. You bet they wanted a close look at the Queen Elizabeth.
How does it operate? What are its radar signatures like? Launching and recovering aircraft, all that.
Exactly. Get real-world data on its capabilities. But second, it's about assertion. It's a very visible way to say, this is our claimed territory, we're watching you, and we're ready to defend it.
So it sends a message not just to the UK, but to anyone else watching, including the US and its allies like Japan or Australia.
Precisely. It demonstrates resolve. It reinforces their claims through action, not just words. It's part of their standard playbook in the region.
And this didn't just stay at sea, did it? The diplomats got involved pretty quickly.
Oh, yeah. Immediately. Both London and Beijing started putting out statements, choosing their words very, very carefully.
How did the UK frame it? What was their justification?
Their line was all about freedom of navigation. Phonos, basically, though maybe not formally designated as such in this case. They kept stressing the transit was perfectly legal under international law.
So citing UNCLS, the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea.
Exactly. Saying, we have the right to sail here, these are international waters, essentially positioning it as upholding the rules-based order.
Which aligns pretty closely with the US position on the South China Sea as well.
It does. And this ties into the UK's whole global Britain idea post-Brexit. They want to show they're still a major player on the world stage, especially in the Indo-Pacific.
So working with allies, showing presence.
Right. Working with the US, Japan, Australia, India, showing they're committed to regional stability as they see it. They framed their presence as a contribution, not a challenge.
Okay, so that's the UK angle. How did China react publicly?
China's response was, well, predictable but firm. They condemned it, called it a threat to their sovereignty, a risk to stability.
And just doubled down on their claims to the sea?
Absolutely. Reasserted their territorial claims and basically said the shadowing was a necessary defensive measure to protect their interests, standard rhetoric for them in these situations.
And you often see state media getting involved quite heavily in these cases.
Oh, for sure. Outlets like the Global Times were all over it. Very sharp tone.
What kind of things were they saying?
Framing the UK deployment as a provocation, sometimes bringing up, old colonial history, painting it as outdated interference from a former power.
Interesting. Really trying to shape the narrative domestically and maybe regionally too.
Definitely. The core message was, China sees foreign military activity here as hostile, an infringement, and they will push back. Understanding that perspective is key, particularly for U.S. strategists trying to navigate this region.
So we have the ships maneuvering, the diplomats talking. But there was another layer to this, wasn't there? Something less visible.
Yeah, the silent battle, you could call it. Electronic warfare and intelligence gathering. That's a huge part of these encounters.
Okay, break that down for us. What does that actually mean in this context?
Well, think about all the electronics on these modern warships. Radars, communication systems, sensors. They're constantly emitting signals.
And constantly listening.
Exactly. So both the Queen Elizabeth and the Type 52D have sophisticated EW, electronic warfare systems. They're designed to detect the opponent's signals, analyze them.
Figure out what kind of radar they have, how it works, what frequencies they use for comms.
Precisely. Build an electronic picture. The Chinese destroyer would have been vacuuming up everything it could about the Queen Elizabeth's electronic signature. It's invaluable intelligence.
Trying to find weaknesses or just understand capabilities better for the future.
Right. And at the same time, the British carrier group is doing the exact same thing. The Queen Elizabeth has its own advanced systems, like the Artisan radar.
Which I heard is pretty resistant to jamming and can track, like, hundreds of targets.
Yeah, it's a very capable system. So they'd be monitoring the Chinese destroyer's emissions, trying to understand its capabilities just as much. It's this constant electronic probing and listening.
Like a digital cat and mouse game happening alongside the physical one.
You got it. And it's not just the ship's main systems. Think about other assets.
Like what? Drones? Helicopters?
For sure. Both sides likely use drones for surveillance.
Yeah.
The British almost certainly use their Merlin helicopters. Those have pretty advanced radar and sonar, good for spotting surface ships and potentially submarines too.
Submarines. So they might have been involved as well, lurking unseen.
It's entirely possible. Major naval deployments like this often have submarine escorts operating covertly. So the intelligence gathering is happening above, on, and below the surface. It's multidimensional.
And all this data gets fed back, analyzed.
And helps build a better picture of the potential adversary's capabilities, tactics, operational patterns. Crucial stuff for planning future operations, something the U.S. military spends a lot of time analyzing too, given its own presence.
It really puts this single encounter into a much bigger picture, doesn't it? This whole geopolitical struggle in the Indo-Pacific.
Absolutely. You can't look at this incident in isolation. It's part of that larger dynamic. China rising, asserting itself more forcefully, particularly in its near seas.
And the U.S. and its allies pushing back, trying to uphold freedom of navigation and the existing international order.
Exactly. The South China Sea is ground zero for a lot of that competition. It's strategically vital, economically vital. It's where these different visions for the region clash most visibly.
And the UK inserting itself back into this picture, especially after Brexit.
It shows their strategic realignment. They see the Indo-Pacific as critical for their future, economically, yes, but also in terms of security. They want to be seen as a reliable partner.
Partnering with the US, Australia, Japan, countries worried about China's expansionism.
Right. So deploying the carrier group was a very tangible way to signal that commitment, to show they're willing to put military assets on the line to support regional security, and frankly, to align with the U.S. approach. Participating in phone and sailing through contested waters, it all points in that direction.
It's fascinating how one event can capture so many threads: the military tech, the diplomacy, the hidden intel war, the big global power shifts.
It really is a microcosm.
And thankfully, this specific encounter, while tense, didn't blow up. But it could have, right? The potential was there.
Oh, absolutely. You always have to consider what could have happened. These situations are inherently risky.
Like what? What are the nightmare scenarios?
Well, the most obvious is a collision. You have large, heavily armed ships maneuvering in close proximity, maybe in bad weather, maybe under political pressure, a miscalculation, a moment of human error.
And suddenly you have damaged warships, maybe casualties, and a massive diplomatic crisis.
Yeah.
Accusations flying back and forth.
Exactly. That could escalate incredibly quickly, potentially drawing in other powers like the U.S. almost immediately.
Or even short of a collision, just an unplanned engagement.
Yeah. Someone misinterprets a signal, thinks they're being targeted or locked onto by weapon systems. Maybe a warning shot is fired and it gets returned.
And you spiral into a shooting match before cooler heads can prevail.
It's a terrifying thought, but it's a real risk when tensions are high and forces are operating so close together. A local incident could become a major military crisis with global implications very fast.
And you mentioned electronic warfare.
Yeah.
Could that escalate too? Like cyber attacks?
That's another modern risk. Trying to disable or disrupt the other side's systems, radar, comms, maybe even weapons control through electronic or cyber means.
That sounds incredibly dangerous.
It is, because while it might offer a temporary advantage, it's highly escalatory. An attack like that would almost certainly provoke a strong response, maybe in kind, maybe asymmetrical, and could broaden the conflict way beyond just the ships involved.
So the fact that none of that happened here, it shows maybe some professionalism, some de-escalation protocols worked.
Probably a measure of both. Professional navies generally try to avoid unintended conflict, but it still highlights just how fragile this situation can be. One mistake, one overly aggressive commander, things could go sideways fast.
Okay, so let's try and wrap this up. For our listeners, especially thinking about this from a U.S. standpoint, this whole Queen Elizabeth versus Type 52D episode wasn't just ships passing in the, well, contested sea.
Not at all. It was a really concentrated example of the bigger picture. You saw China's determination to enforce its claims. You saw the UK stepping back onto the global stage alongside allies like the US.
And you got a glimpse of the constant high-stakes game of surveillance and military signaling that goes on in these critical waters. Plus, the inherent risks involved.
Right. It underscores the complexities and the tensions in the Indo-Pacific, a region absolutely vital to global stability and trade. It really forces you to think about how nations balance their interests against the need to avoid conflict.
So here's something for you, our listeners, to think about. We see more and more military activity in the South China Sea, more close encounters. The risk of miscalculation feels like it's always there. What do you think is the most likely future for stability or instability in this waterway? And maybe more pointedly, considering U.S. interests and presence, what role should the United States realistically play in shaping that future?
A lot to chew on there.
Definitely. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.